Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to you here in the room. Welcome to you if you're joining us online. Good morning. Welcome. We're just getting everyone to settle down here in the room. So if you're online with us, get yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and we are now about to begin. So welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see you here. Thank you for making us part of your morning. I know this is a very eagerly anticipated day. I've already spoken to quite a few people who have said, today is my day. Today is where I get to find out the things that I want to. And I trust you had a good evening last night at the networking event. A quick show of hands. Who spoke to somebody and had a conversation yesterday evening? Who spoke to somebody that they wouldn't normally have met before? So made a new connection. Fantastic. Great. Who managed to speak to a farmer or a producer? Wonderful. And who has got more numbers in their phone that they know that they can call on if they need to? Brilliant. Maybe we possibly swap numbers a little bit later. Let's remind ourselves what we have talked about so far and the context of our meeting today, because we've already talked about a lot of crucial topics, information, we've shared opinions, so many different areas of this vitally important industry. Let me just give you a quick recap of what we talked about yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the second edition of EU Agri-food Days.
The agri-food sector is at the heart of our European way of life.
3 billion euro. It is the largest financing package dedicated to European agriculture, forestry and fisheries in our group's history.
It is about time that we develop together a vision for the future of agriculture and food.
It is deeply unfair to make farmers alone responsible. All actors have to act and to change.
Farmers also has to be very involved in decision making.
We need a better remuneration for farmers because we need some investment for more sustainable food production.
Consumer felt they didn't have transparency.
To get happy farmers, we need to have a fair income so we can invest for the future.
Tell me, who managed to have a piece of that cake last night? Was it good? Very good, apparently. So lots and lots of different things that we talked about. You heard there regulations, support for small farms, particularly support for farmers. That really came across. Support of getting a fair remuneration for farmers. The part also that consumers and buyers play in that entire food chain. And it was great to see the young influencers, the farm influencers, and hear about their stories and how they are engaging a whole new audience. So today, what we are going to look at is the market outlook very shortly. And I'll let you actually get a copy of this year's market outlook as well. Plus, we have sessions on sustainability in challenging economic times and the very important discussion on trade policies and food sovereignty. That's later this afternoon. So a lot that we've got to get through today. Starting now, though, with our first session, presenting the EU Agricultural Outlook report. We're going to look on the changing environment that's driving different markets. What's basically changed in that environment over the last few years? What could change, what might change, and what will influence the markets as we go forward. What we thought we would do is actually start with a wider outlook. And we're going to bring the United States into this. And I'm really pleased that we have the person with us here this morning who is responsible for the US Agricultural Outlook report. So from the US Department of Agriculture, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Seth Mayer.
All right, it's my pleasure to be here with you all this morning. As you can see in your program, I'm USDA's chief economist. One of my primary jobs, I have a pretty broad portfolio, but one of my primary jobs is to forecast markets. My primary job is to forecast markets. As a matter of fact, my team released what is known as the WASDE report yesterday, about 14 hours ago. Monthly report, watched very closely by the markets. And I'm an economist, and I like pictures, so I'm going to show you several pictures about what we've had to deal with in the last 4 years. And I'm going to kind of use this as an excuse for why I've been wrong several times in the last 4 years. It's been a really challenging environment. We've had a lot of events over the last 4 years, some of which linger, some of which have passed, some of which may change the dynamic for several years to come. So again, this is kind of my confession about challenges that we've faced over the last few years. Just one quick look at primary commodity prices tells you the path we've been through over the last 4 years. We've seen a huge run-up in prices, a significant moderation of prices over just a 4-year period. Okay. There is a lot embedded in this as well, too. And as we get through a few of these other slides in my short presentation here, I'll also tell you why this isn't all that unusual, this pattern that we go through. And we go from a period of price spikes to a period of very tight margins for producers, and it produces their own challenge. We forget about the high price spikes, and they come back again at some other interval. So clearly one of the challenges, and I'm going to show you pictures. These are pictures. You don't have to dig into the details. I'll describe them. But these are pictures to remind us what we've dealt with over the last 4 years. One of the big challenges, perhaps surprises in response, is war in Ukraine. Okay, we've seen that this introduced, you could see in that price spike, much of the price spike, the topping of the price spike, induced by things going on in Ukraine. Here is Ukraine's export patterns. And I think one of the things that surprised me most, something I was, again, wrong about, was the volume of shipping, how Ukraine responded, how much grain actually flowed out of the Ukraine. I had initially thought this might be very tight. Some actions by the European Union, perhaps less targeting of ships, understanding that food is in fact different, allowed that grain to flow. So one of the surprises is where the amount of grain flowing out of Ukraine remains a question on how much that production and grain flow will continue into the future. That's one of our challenges going forward. The other challenge here is that one of the folks that have been, the country that's been setting the low end of the wheat price range for the last many months is Russia. Russia's been exporting a huge amount of wheat. This has changed over time. About a decade and a half ago, I began to notice this. 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This is also a part of the world where wheat production has historically been quite volatile. So now you have a country which represents 25% of the global trade in wheat, and yet historically yields have been quite volatile, and the Russians exercise some control over pricing schemes. They have been setting the low price for wheat in the market. They've had 2 huge crops in a row. Where will this next 2 crops be, and what will the seasonal pattern be, and what do we see in the wheat markets? Another aspect of this, I showed you 3 commodity prices. I showed you corn, soybeans, and wheat. This is India's share of, India's production of rice and its share of rice trade. What you'll notice is they have been increasing production domestically in order to service domestic food security, but they've become a bigger share of trade except when they put export controls on and induce volatility into the global market, really perhaps harming those consumers most vulnerable in the world who are import dependent and price sensitive for rice. So I think we also have to remind ourselves that internal policies, when folks put export controls on, this induces volatility into the global market. So something we have to remind ourselves on, that's been another factor in extreme price movements, is perhaps poor trade behavior. Now, let's talk a little bit about China. We cannot have a conversation about the outlook, short or long run, without China. Here is soybean production in South America and Chinese import demand over time. You can grow the size of the South American crop 5, 7, 8 million metric tons a year if the Chinese will take it. And over nearly a decade and a half, the Chinese did take it. What we've observed is a slowing of both Chinese demand and the Chinese economy, and South American crops will be over 210 million metric tons this year. Where do those beans go? What is the next China? What is the next source of demand as South American crops increase in size? We have faced a lot of competition in the United States from from other South American countries. So I'm going to show you a couple quick slides here. Red is the United States, green is Argentina and Brazil, and you've noticed we've developed a just-in-time delivery system to China for soybeans. We are never more than 6 months away from a very large soybean crop around the world. And I've actually got 2 slides for you, because this one is according to China, what China takes in. And this is one according to all of us who send Chinese stuff. And if you had a quick eye, you would notice those numbers are not the same. One of the other features, an outlook that we are continuing to deal with is, you would think that in a society where data is ever more prevalently available, we would have more data. But we do not. We have to back into what we think Russia is exporting in terms of wheat, because Russia no longer reports it. The difference between what China says it brings in for soybeans and what exporters say they are sending to China is not a small amount. 8, 9, 10 million metric tons. So you're talking about maybe 8, 9, 10% production trade discrepancies. So we have less market information now than we have in the past. And at the same time, China is diversifying its sources by changing its policies. People are looking to diversify the sources after the price spikes and other actions. And so everything in blue here is something that's corn-like, something like corn that is going into China from the US. The green is Brazil's corn. Change in policy, change in destination, change in trade relationships, more competition for us into China, much more competition around the world. Trade. This is our U.S. export trade, and I think that it will be a good trade discussion later on today. Look at the volatility in some of our trade relationships. Take away that picture. Take away the ranking that China has varied from 5th to 1st by a long way as our export destination in the United States. Trade is absolutely one of the uncertainties that we have to deal with. Used cooking oil. I know this will be a very unusual one for you. But environmental policy, unifying environmental policy, how different countries treat different feedstocks in biofuel production as one example, and perhaps the unintended consequences of trading used cooking oil in the production of biofuels. I show this picture to tell you that one way we're meeting our biofuel obligation is importing used cooking oil. I think there are unintended consequences from not understanding policy well. Input prices followed commodity prices higher, but we've seen this before. Through time, we have spikes in output prices that are followed by spikes in input prices. When commodity prices return to more normal levels, input prices do not. They are slower to decrease. This puts a squeeze on our producers, and we go through several years of tight margins. So we have exited the phase of profitability for our farmers, not just in the U.S., and now we're in the phase where margins are much tighter for those producers. And finally, food price inflation. Food price inflation as we've experienced it in the US. I think you've experienced it here. Experienced it, I came straight from Tokyo 2 days ago. They were experiencing it there. So part of this also, I think, brings us to the point of when we have these exercises of an outlook, while challenging, these remain important tools for policy analysis. Okay, because we have to, what we see from these shocks that we've experienced over the last several years is we have a 3-legged stool. We have production which we want to be environmentally sustainable. But we need farmers to be able to make a living doing it. And the food has to be safe and affordable. We have to accomplish all 3 tasks. And there can be trade-offs. There can be some necessary trade-offs, but you cannot pick one leg of the stool and focus on that single leg of the stool. And this tool provides us, these Outlook tools provide us an opportunity to assess the trade-offs. Now, I do think that there are technologies which can satisfy all three. I think in things in the United States like high-efficiency fertilizers, or new see and spray technology from John Deere tractors that targets lower pesticide use. That's a win-win on all three pillars of technology. So I think that it's my pleasure to have been here. I hope that you will cut me a break for being wrong on several times over the last 4 years, but you can see that these are very large and important shocks. So with that, I thank you.
Very much. Thank you. I saw a lot of people taking pictures of the slides. Seth, I'm pretty sure you're happy if we put them into the whole pack. That's, yes, lovely. So after the end of the conference, everything that you have seen, all the presentations will actually be available as well. So absolutely take any pictures that you want, but don't worry, you will get all this information. Seth will be joining us later on the panel as well to talk about how he's not always wrong, and more about his three-legged stool. So what we're going to do now, with that wider context, we're going to come back to us and look at the 2024 EU Agricultural Outlook Report. Now, this is just, what time is it? 9:30. This is just being released now, so you are seeing this as the same time that it is being released to everyone. And we will give you a QR code shortly that you can actually download it for yourselves. So to take us through it, please welcome the Acting Head of Unit Analysis and Outlook at the Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development. Please welcome Bence Todt. Bence.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sasha, for the kind introduction. It's always super difficult to come after Seth. He does a very dynamic presentation, which reminded me I met him 14 years ago, 17 years ago, when I was doing Outlook exercise in the past, and now I remember that it was a tough job then, and then it's a tough job now. But I'll do my best to keep the momentum and run you through the Outlook that we have just released, actually, yes, 15 minutes ago, if I understand well. So the little brochures that you were collecting yesterday, if you pass by the MTO exhibition stand, the QR codes are now active. So just a caveat for those of you who are recurrent customers and visitors to the Outlook conference and these presentations, this time is going to be a little different. So firstly, I'm not Andrea Czapkowiczova. Secondly, the nature of the presentation is going to be a bit mixed. I will show you a bit what the MTO, our Outlook, is all about, so that you have an understanding what you are looking at, what it is and what it's not. And then I will show you a few of the key results, what we have. And then I will also dabble a bit into the area of uncertainties. So it's not just the USDA that can get forecasts wrong. It's also the European Commission, which can get projections way off. So with that, I will also have a final slide showing you that, I mean, we're not complacent and we're not sort of happy about what we're doing. We're constantly striving for more. So with that, I hope I'm going to press the right button here. There we go. So what is the Outlook exercise about? This is important for you to understand that it's not a forecast. Basically, what you see here is based on a number of very important assumptions that we put in the models. And basically, we take the assumptions from various sources. On the macroeconomic side, we use external sources putting out macroeconomic forecasts and projections. We take the general environment, the world trade environment and the agriculture environment from the OECD FAO Outlook. So this Outlook, which we just released today, it is based on the 2024 OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook. We also have the reference to the 2024 autumn short-term outlook that we produce in DG Agri that was released in September. And basically, we take into account information for this exercise, which is available around end of September in terms of data, and also some expert information around October. And as you know, things change fast. So sometimes that we look at something that is there in September, it has changed, already putting the projections a bit off. There's always that risk. What is also important here is that we assume constant policies and trade environment. So basically, we only take into account policies with respect to EU, but also worldwide from that we have, that are already implemented at the time of finalizing the projections. So basically, you will not see anything with respect to the deforestation regulation or Mercosur, to touch upon the recent developments. And importantly, we use the AgLink-Cosimo model for the exercise, which is basically the tool developed and used by the OECD and the FAO. It's very important to mention that it's a collaborative exercise, so we work hand in hand with the JRC, and I'm happy to say that we have here the director and two heads of unit who contribute to the exercise. It's very important because we provide, on the one hand, the policy know-how, also the market know-how, and in the JRC, they have the technical expertise to basically put the models in shape. It's a constant exercise. Just a bit of a, an overview of some key assumptions and drivers, just to show you how this looks in practice. So on the left, you see what we put in the model and actually what we're using as a basis of the OECD FAO outlook with respect to the world food consumption projections. So basically here is just to signify that according to this outlook, the driver of global food demand is coming mainly from low-income countries, but also medium-income countries, which are not shown on the graph, but basically showing that the high-income countries are rather stable. Meaning that there are prospects for trade growth, of course. The question is how we see the EU capitalizing on this opportunity. Then on the right side, you see the assumptions on oil prices and exchange rates. So basically here, the oil price is assumed to go up on a rather linear path in nominal terms. In real terms, it would be flat. This is important to mention because in the model, the oil price is an important determinant for energy costs. So basically, it has an impact on the consumption, intermediate consumption of agriculture. So it has, of course, then an impact on what you have in terms of productivity capacity, but also in terms of the final income estimation that we put together. The exchange rate, which shows here, we assume a steady but rather slow appreciation of the euro versus the dollar. This is, of course, very important in the model with respect to the competitiveness of EU agriculture with respect to exports. So just show a few results. I will show you two slides on supply, on demand, on trade, and then some other relevant for policy purposes results. So in terms of the supply, what we see is that here both pictures, they compare the situation between 2014 and 2024, so more or less the observed annual growth rates on the left for crops, on the right for animal products, and then basically the purple bars, they show you what we have in terms of annual growth rate for the projection. So you see that compared to the past, we have a bit of a change. So basically on wheat, we are less optimistic, but we see an upswing in maize, barley, and then from the animal sector side on poultry, although at a lower rate than we have seen over the last decade. Moving on to demand, here what is important to see is, again, on the left, now we have the animal proteins, and on the right we have per capita consumption on fruit and vegetables. Just for you to know that for fruit and vegetables, we don't have actually any modeling behind. So this is based on expert judgment. We have established an outlook based on the information that we have, and then we tested it with market experts. So what you see here is not model-based, but it's based more on an expert judgment following interactions with relevant stakeholders. So the main story here is that for the animal proteins, dairy consumption is relatively flat, so we don't expect a lot of growth there. Rather, we see change in the type of dairy that is being consumed, so less fresh milk, more cheese and fresh dairy products. But overall, we don't see the potential for a big increase in per capita demand in the EU. When it comes to the meat products, there poultry is the one that is continuing its expansion. We have seen poultry grow quite considerably over the past decade, also over the past couple of years, according to our short-term outlook, and this is set to continue, while the other meats are projected to decline. Fruit and veg side, yes, it's going a bit up, but also here is just to show that there is an improvement in let's say, the healthy diet aspect of EU consumption that we expect. On the other hand, also take into account that these products which we have here represent only roughly 35% of fruit and vegetable consumption overall. So this is just an indicative slide. When it comes to trade, what you see here is the annual growth rate of EU exports for commodities on the left, and then an agricultural trade balance on the right. Note that the agricultural trade balance is not with respect to the value, so that is not what is shown, but basically it shows the crude protein equivalent. The message behind that graph, you see the line is basically the line at the bottom shows that we are in a deficit of protein, meaning that we are net importers, and that is likely due, or it's due to the dependence on feed imports. But there is a gradual recovery over the medium term, and basically we are importing less grains, oilseeds, but we are at the same time exporting a bit more meat, which is basically poultry. That this is the projection. Other commodities are not that optimistic, as you see basically on the left hand side. We have just a bit of upswing higher than what we have seen so far for barley and oilseeds. So what does this mean in terms of self-sufficiency and income? So these are very interesting and important elements to consider for the outlook, because from this we can also derive some, let's say, higher level policy implications. So self-sufficiency, there's a lot of talk about it now, about food sovereignty, etc., food security. So what we see, according to our projections, is that the EU will remain self-sufficient for the most number of commodities, and even for those for which we are not self-sufficient at the moment, there is an outlook for a slight improvement. And given that we are self-sufficient, we produce more than we consume, it also means that we keep exporting and contributing to global food security. However, it's also true, and there's no slide on that, that if you put it in the overall perspective of the world outlook, basically the contribution of EU exports, so the share of EU exports within total global trade is actually shrinking, declining over time. This is a very important element to mention, because meaning, coming back to what I mentioned at the beginning, taking the opportunity of a growing world consumption, it's not fully exploited by the EU. But we continue to produce high-quality products. When it comes to farm income, here you see four bars, or four categories of bars. What is interesting here is that in nominal terms, farm income is increasing, but when you factor in inflation, that's the second three bars, then you see that it's in real terms the situation in the future will be a bit below the the current 2022-2024 level. However, keep in mind that at the EU level, this is also very important to highlight that we're talking about EU level average, aggregate, so things vary very much at member state level, but at the EU level, basically in 2022-2023, at least for which we have the information from Eurostat, we had a high income level. So overall, the situation is not necessarily pessimistic. However, again, when it comes to the factor income per annual work unit, we see that when you look at that in real terms, basically there is just a slight increase. And what is driving that, what is also important, is that for the income, we assume a trend basically for the evolution of annual work unit. What this means in reality is that to maintain the increase in real income per annual work unit, it means that there is a continued restructuring of the agricultural sector. For us, the assumption was to go from 7.6 million in 23 to 6.9 million annual work units by the end of the outlook, which is slightly below 9% decline, a lower rate than before. Also important to highlight that here there is a distinction between salaried, non-salaried. So according to the analysis, salaried work is about to improve like it did over the past years, but non-salaried is declining. So these are very important outcomes for us to consider for policy implications. Also the environmental aspect. So this outlook features a chapter on the environmental implications of our projections. Just note that this is produced with a different model, the Capri model, which is also done in the JRC, in ISPRA. So this work is coming from the ISPRA colleagues. Basically here, I don't want to dwell into it too much, but if we translate the projections of the outlook with respect to production, area, livestock, etc. And also this model is now incorporating some of the farm practices that are supported by the CAP. For the moment, only to a limited extent, but the combined result is that EU agriculture is on track on improving its environmental and climate footprint. Then we come to the uncertainties. So here, what I would like to show you is twofold. One is what is the source of uncertainty, what we do with it, and what do we do with it in terms of modeling. And then I will also reveal, some of the, let's say, the implications of what we got wrong, what others got wrong, and what it means in terms of the projections. So basically, here what you see are two graphs on the sources of uncertainty. On the left, crude oil price projections. On the right, wheat yield projections. So here, what colleagues, again, this time in JRC Sevilla do is they run a stochastic analysis. So looking at a range of 1,000 simulations on probabilities regarding these variables. Why I show these two graphs is because crude oil price is a very important indicator or proxy, again, for the costs of production. So this graph shows that the center firm line is the assumption that we have in the current outlook. And basically, you see the gap up and down, which shows the probable level of volatility fluctuation over the period. This is important to know then, because we might have to face such situations. On the right, we show the soft wheat yield projection, which is important because this is basically a proxy of what we can expect in terms of the weather and climate implications. So here again, this represents that there is a very wide gap, wide range where yields could actually basically materialize in the future. You see on the left, before the straight linear line, there is that volatility, both for the crude oil price or for wheat yield. So it's very important for us to take this into consideration. So what does this mean in terms of the implications on certain variables of the projections? So we ran the same stochastics, so on crude oil and wheat yield, and what we get in terms of the soft wheat price projection and the poultry price projection is what you see on the left side and on the right side. So basically, if you look at the variation, the possibility of different outlook on crude oil and wheat yield, these are the ranges for the wheat price and the poultry price that could materialize. So again, here, this is very important information for us to factor in terms of when we talk about policy change, we need to take into consideration that, we have volatility, we need to find ways of addressing that. What do? We also model uncertainty. So before I was mentioning to you the stochastic analysis based on probabilities, but we also have sort of like targeted scenarios. So in the current Outlook report, we have a chapter which is a stress test of extreme weather scenario, where we basically look at the possible implications of a 25–30% reduction in yields of protein crops in the countries from who we import animal feed. So basically, we see what is the implication. The model was run basically to put the shock to the baseline that we have in 2035, and you see first on the right side what this means in terms of crop market trends. So basically, of course, we import much less, we consume much less, prices go up quite high. So on the right side, you see the price difference. There is, of course, models are calibrated on elasticities that are assumed. Sometimes when you have a shock, elasticities change. So don't take this at face value. It's just an indication that, yes, the shock will lead to a quite considerable increase in the price. This we will have to look into. And then on the left-hand side, you see what this means in terms of implication on the animal sector. What is interesting for you to know, and I advocate that you actually click on the QR code and read the report, because there we follow up this shock, looking at what the EU could do in terms of mitigating measures. So in terms of mitigating measures, we have looked at an increase in the feed use and also higher yields, and learned that these are fine, but not sufficient to weather the storm. Then just going quickly through the rest of the slides. So this is basically the admission where we got things wrong, or rather on the left two slides, what the assumptions that we put in the model are wrong. So basically, the stable lines are the actual developments of the exchange rate, and then on oil prices, and then you have the dashed line on top, which was actually the assumption that we put in the 2014 medium-term outlook. So you see that there was a clear short-term bias. It started high. It was assumed that it remains high, but it turned out quite differently. And on the right-hand side, you see what we had in terms of the yield trend for maize. Again, we had the rather linear development, but the reality turned out to be different. At least I'm happy to say that the yield curve is a bit closer to reality than the assumptions that we took from others. So go Agri team. But basically, again, here the importance is that, yes, we do our best. Everybody does their best to try to see how the future would look like, but then, yeah, it turns out differently. For yields, of course, you had the heat waves and the drought, etc. So clear explanations. So what this means in terms of results, just to quickly go through, I will concentrate more on the right chart. This is how we saw or expected, projected dairy exports for the EU to materialize in the 2014 Outlook exercise. And then again, the line is the actual development. So we were more bullish, optimistic. So to wrap up, what have we learned? Basically, we need to improve. We need to make sure that we are always up to speed on developments. We need good data. We need the right models. And for that, what we have to do is continue the close cooperation with JRC, because we need to make sure that the models are always fit to the purpose, up to date. And also, luckily for us, JRC is very keen on developing new models, so their modeling suite, actually, that we can rely on, not just DG Agri, but the whole Commission, is quite expansive. And I would just like to mention, apart from AgLink and CAPRI, that thanks to the JRC, we have the IFM CAP model, and you find a stand outside in the exhibition hall where they are presenting what they can actually do with it. It provides farm-level analysis. So the outlook that is presented, that is basically in the publication, that's at macro level, meaning EU. But, of course, for us to do our analytical work right, we need to look more deep down, and IFM CAP will provide us with that opportunity, and we hope to be able to share some analysis with you at a later stage. So what is also very important is what has changed since 2014, basically, since we got things wrong. We have engaged with stakeholders. So basically, we opened up our work. We let them peek behind the curtain, so to speak, to see how we do the exercise, and we share first the drivers, the assumptions that we consider important. They provide feedback so that we have a good indication from those on the field how they believe that our assumptions are plausible, realistic. We get feedback on that. And then we also have a validation meeting in autumn on the preliminary projections with select external experts. So this is very important because, yeah, we're sitting here in our offices in Rue de la Loire, but the world is out there. We are not complacent. We don't believe that we are all know-it-alls, but we really rely on the feedback of all experts. And then, as shown, we now do a lot of stochastic analysis, scenarios, targeted ones, to make sure that we try to capture the essence of the uncertainties. We have the environmental, climate aspects in our work process. And then finally, and maybe this is a hook for the panel discussion, to help Sasha out, because I see that she's struggling with all my technical blah blah. Overall, better integration of the baseline exercise for scenario analysis to make it policy relevant. And this is basically what we are about. We are DG Agri, we deal with policy. So the projections, what you see here, the outlook, is basically we put it on the table, but this is nice to have, good to understand, but what we then do with it, that is what really matters. And with that, I thank you for your attention and a good continuation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think probably all the maize team are sitting there very smugly at the moment, saying, yes, look what our projected line was and look what happened. So would you like the report then? Okay, yes. Let's see. We've got a QR code for you. If we can have that now back up. There we go. There we go. So that's the Slido one. Can I just check? That's the one. There it is. Lovely. Or if we now change it on the board behind me. So I can see it there if we can. Lovely, thank you. There you go. That's your Outlook report. There it is. If you don't manage to get the QR code here, we have it on the DG Agri stand outside. This was, as Benza said, this was released at 9:15 this morning, so you're getting the first look at it. And what we have done is we have experts from particular groups, particular parts of the industry that will be joining the Agri stand at various times. And I will tell you the ones that we have at coffee break, because they'll be out there ready to talk to you and explain some of the preliminary findings that you might already see. So there you go, on this side of the room as well. There you go. And also I think you've got it online as well. It is also, the QR code is also outside, so you can download it there when you're having a chat. Now, what we thought we would do in this session, because the report has only just been released, and I know that you would like to digest it, read and digest it first, what we're going to do is we're not going to take questions on the report itself, because we've decided to put the experts outside during coffee break and lunch break so that you can actually get into the detail, because we thought it's so huge, as you know, so many different parts of it, that probably it's better to do those conversations in a more one-to-one basis. So I hope you understand that. What we are going to do is tackle some of the areas that both Seth and Bensa talked about, and that's the relevance, the usefulness, and how this can be used going forward. Because content aside, whatever the content says, this will look to policymakers to then use the information for their decisions. So we're going to talk about how it's gathered and how going forward maybe it can be slightly more resistant to those shocks. The known unknowns, but also the unknowns as well, everything coming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite our participants to come and join the panel, and then we'll get into that discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, please welcome the Director of Strategy and Policy Analysis at the Directorate General of Agriculture and Rural Development, Catherine Galan-Lanel. Catherine, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to come and sit in that one? Do you want to sit there? That lovely. Thank you. We also have joining us the Director of Trade and Agriculture at the OECD, Marianne Jansen. Marianne, come and join us. Thank you. And Seth, as well, has very kindly agreed to come and be on this panel, Chief Economist at the USDA. I'm very much looking forward to talking more about your report as well. Seth, thank you. Also joining us, Director General of International Food Policy Research at the International Food Policy Research Institute, Johan Swinnen. Johan, come and join us. Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Thank you. Come and take a seat. And economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, Monica Toteva. Monica, come and join us. Thank you, Monica. And finally, the Director of Sustainable Resources at the JRC, Alexandra Zamperi. Alexandra. So, thank you so much. Really good to have you all here and to tackle can I call it a challenging issue of how to get research right? Would that be fair enough? A challenging, quite tricky issue. So very, very important. The question that Bensa ended with, Catherine, was how to look at everything that he and the teams and all the different stakeholders have put together, and then make that useful for policymakers. So as you sit here and you're now given the report, and you, in as much as you start looking at it now, where do you start and where's the usefulness for you?
Well, that's a very important report and piece of work for us as policymakers, because as it was well explained, you know, this is a report that we are obviously sharing with the key stakeholders of the food chain, and I'll come back to that, but that we are also using ourselves. We, in the Commission, want to make sure that we build our policy on the basis of evidence, and that's an important piece of work that we are using when, for example, we design our common agricultural policy. And I'm saying that because we have now started to work on the impact assessment of the common agricultural policy, the one that, you know, will needs to be ready for after 2027. And obviously, this medium-term outlook is going to be used and serve as a basis, as a baseline, you know, for this work. We're using also this quantitative analysis for other kind of activities. Let me illustrate with another one, which is also something which is high on our agenda. We are talking about Mercosur,
yes,
you know.
Yes.
So we shouldn't be shy and mention it, we're not afraid.
There's a whole panel later.
I know.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to enter into the detail of the conversation, but let me say that this year we've issued a report where we had looked at the impact of the cumulative impact of the bilateral trade agreements that the EU has concluded over the last years, including Mercosur. And obviously, we've used also the medium-term outlook to serve as a basis, for this analysis. So that's very important. Important to say also that, and maybe to echo what Seth said, I say it's an important piece of work, not an easy job. We need to remain humble, but still, we need that. And when looking at, how it has evolved over the last, I would say, 20 years, it is important to maybe stress that we've enriched both the models, and I guess that Alessandra will mention that, enrich the models in particular to integrate also other consideration, and in particular, because this is about policy design, so when the policy objectives are changing, you need also to take that into account. So the environmental consideration have now been much more important key feature of both the models as well as the data we're using. And we are, as you will see in the report this year, and this was the case also last year, but we are also looking at not just the impact on analysis on production, price commodities, farm income, labor, but also at the environmental aspects. That's very important because this is part, these are key objectives of our policy. And I'd like to say also that I find very interesting that we have also integrated in this medium-term outlook report, what we call these what-if scenarios, this evolution, looking in particular at the resilience of our agri-food systems, and this year this is about the resilience of our meat sector. So these are all important elements showing that also the models, the data, and the way we are working are evolving, taking into account our policy objectives.
I think what you've just said there about resilience is obviously it's crucial, but so important because resilience is so difficult to measure until it's tested. So you have to have some sort of baseline to see where you could be. And the what-ifs at the moment are there are many. Seth, can I just quickly come to you because Catherine's saying that the report itself has become far more complex, a lot more complexities to it, a lot more factors weighed in. Is it the same for you? Have you seen it become far more integrated with other areas and complex like that?
So I think this as the model improves, it starts to reflect these complexities because you're asking it complex policy questions. You're asking it to produce trade-offs between maybe different agricultural sectors, different parts of the supply chain. You're having environmental impacts. And so I think that as oftentimes policymakers will press us for answers in this type of analysis that really pushes us for model development, right? When they want us to measure climate impacts, it means we need to do a better job in measuring climate impacts. Policy drives us to make models which better reflect where policy direction is going. So, no, absolutely. I think the complexity is necessary because what policymakers are asking their models to do and our models to do are increasingly looking at those trade-offs, complexities.
Yeah. Before we turn to how the models have evolved and how they should evolve in the future, and then we can start to really bring in those great unknowns. Let's just talk about how useful this is for certain monitoring. Monica, for instance, things like the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, does this report help your monitoring when you're trying to see what you should be putting in place for that? Does this sort of help your work?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for invitation. Thank you for having me here. So let's speak a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goal and the goals and the Agenda 2030. Before coming here, I actually checked that we all know that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but we also have 169 targets and 230 indicators. So just if you think about it, this sheer amount of monitoring can use any support it can get, all right? So the reports, the medium-term outlook, the Commission medium-term outlook, the Agri-food medium-term outlook, the other products that are coming out, they are already to a certain extent contributing to the monitoring efforts by informing, for example, about what is going to happen on the food commodity markets. We need to remember that more than 20% of the calories are traded, and by issuing this report, you are informing about the potential prospects of what would be happening on those commodity markets in the future. Now, it brings back to what Seth was talking about, Catherine, Bence, that there are just many more uncertainties out there. And to make this happen, or make this exercise even more useful, we need to know more about these uncertainties, and these uncertainties being modeled in terms of some sort of scenarios. I like the what if. I wonder how many times we are going to mention before the end of the debate, the what if time of the debate. So, where you are now, the medium-term outlooks are informing the availability pillar of the food security. In food security, as you might know, we are talking about availability, access, utilization, and affordability. Thank you. So we are very much in this availability pillar. All right? And without additional tweaking, it will be difficult to get into the other pillars. Now, the question is, it might or might not be worth it, but what I would propose is to get a little bit more into the nutrition part, because once you already have the estimates, the forecast of the commodity parameters, it should not be, and you talk about the calories, the OECD FAO outlook talks about the calories, it talks about the per capita protein consumption, for example. It shouldn't be that difficult to stretch it a little bit more and just add a few equations and talk about the nutritional value of the foods that you are talking. Because the discussion, as we also had yesterday, is moving away from the calories, which is not to say that the calories are not important, especially if you are in a situation of acute food insecurity. But the lens we are getting more is the lens of the nutrition and healthy diets.
That's very interesting, because for years, everyone has just talked calories, and that's been the metric. That's been the box, and now changing. Yes, please do.
If I just may add to it, you reminded me that yes, we are talking about calories, but we are getting into the situation that in many countries, even in many households, you have the situation that part of the household is suffering from lack of calories and the part of the household is obese, right? Or people are obese, but they are suffering from serious nutrient deficiencies. So we need to bring the debate closer to what is happening on the nutrient front, as opposed to the global availability is important, but to take it a step further.
Marion, you're looking quite thoughtful there as you're listening to that. Just wondering what was going through your mind.
I don't think you're interested in what was going through my mind.
No, I think we definitely are now.
You want me to provide some insights here, and when I'm looking like this, I'm thinking and trying to understand better. No, we're dealing definitely with a very complex situation. I was thinking about the fact that We are, as we heard before, on the one hand, interested in understanding better all these uncertainties, these stochastic events in our models, but at the same time, we are having to understand better very long-term drivers like climate change. And that's actually something we are right now focusing on. We will be probably be looking at in our next outlook with the FAO in how we can bring a longer-term view into this analysis. And that's what I was thinking about. My question was, oh my goodness, how is that going to fit with the fact that in reality we are so concerned about all these big, important, frequent, big changes and how to marry, we call it stochastic analysis, with this view of the very long term. So that's one of the challenges we are facing. We're having other challenges there, how to deal with the fact that we are dealing with models here that are relatively macro. We look at big pictures, but at the same time, with our policy setting, we try to set incentives at the very micro level. We are trying to give incentives to farmers to apply production technologies that are more greenhouse gas efficient, that are better in the water use. And some companies do better, some farmers do better than other farmers. How do we marry this fact that our policies are often now very micro, are very targeted, but our model cannot really capture that because all this information, we do not have it at the granular level. So another challenge, the granular versus the bigger picture. So that's what I was thinking about. What else are you interested in?
I think, yeah, the point you make about the different stretch of the long term when policies can be very short term, but actually when you're talking about policies for farmers, they make a long-term difference. So you're almost working in parallel, but at different time frames. Johan, let me bring you in here. And first of all, when someone sort of talks about this report and says to you, this is something policymakers look at, what are the first things that go through your mind? What are maybe the limitations we're talking a lot about, but also what are the things that you can get out of it?
Well, is this working? Yeah. Let me first talk. I thought the presentation was very good, actually. So, and I also very much applaud the fact that the presentation report is very explicit about the uncertainties behind it. I think one can do maybe a little bit better in separating out the uncertainties you can deal with and the ones you cannot deal with. I don't think you should take lack of credit for the fact that the macroeconomists didn't have the US exchange rate right. Or I think also on the oil prices, etc. I think on the other hand, I think, for example, it's important to separate out the short-run weather effects, which are very hard. You don't know what the weather is going to be in 2026. But I think you do have information about what the climate change effects are going to be on average by 26 and 27, etc. We now know that if you look at the total factor productivity evolutions in the world, I mean, and we have regional data on that. I mean, USDA has done fantastic work on this thing together with other organizations, show that TFP, total factor productivity in agriculture, has grown tremendously from the 1970s to 2010. But since then, there's a very significant decline caused by climate change. Those things can go in, right? And I think one is fairly confident about the average effects there going forward. In terms of then particularly on the report here, taking it forward, I think Europe is really, I mean, my organization, I've done actually a lot of work on European ag policy and food issues in my earlier part of my career. Now my organization works mostly on low and middle income countries. There, I think the EU predictions are very important. First of all, because the EU is such an important part of the global food system. And so as a trading partner, whatever happens here, the impact on global markets are important. I think one of the issues which we're not talked much about, but it's on the impact on what's happening in the food industry. I mean, the investments in the rest of the world by the European food industry, the norms, the standards which are imposed in Europe, which are translating themselves into norms and food standards in the rest of the world, because the global impacts, I think, are really important. And I also think that Europe should be an example for the rest of the world in how to deal with trade-offs in terms of nutrition, in terms of climate change, broader biodiversity and environmental effects, and ag and food policy going forward. And I think it will play an important role, and to the extent that this report contributes to provide data on that, I think it is very important.
Do you agree with that, Seth?
No, absolutely. I think that this brings up a couple of things. When I was talking about my own forecast failures, these are very short-run forecast failures. I think that this, as Benzo was talking about, this isn't a forecast tool. This is a tool for which you do what-if scenarios and you compare things. So policy makers can use the tool to both look at what long-term drivers are, assess them, make policies which take into account these trade-offs within the sector. And I think that, so first of all, I agree that this report is quite interesting in this way, and one looks at things longer. I didn't mention climate change at all. I didn't. I think when we look at total factor productivity, I think that part of those gains have perhaps offset or masked, or our ability to adapt thus far to climate change has been pretty decent, but where's the inflection point out there? And so I think these models, both in the medium term and the long term, trying to account for, do we reach that inflection point, and how do we put policies in place that push that inflection point out or eliminate that inflection point? I just came from Japan, and I talked about the story of a Christmas story. So the ghost of Christmas past, the things that you've done wrong in the past. And then you have the ghost of Christmas now, and then you have the ghost of Christmas future. So if you do not change your behavior, this is where you will end up. And so these are policy tools, both in the medium and the short run, that say, what policies can we put in place so we are not the ghost of Christmas future?
I like that. Yeah, you've got a lot of nods from your fellow panelists. Alessandra, let's talk models then, okay? That's a tough area to try and have everyone feed into. All that you've heard so far is people saying that models have got to take all of this into account. What is the most important thing for you? What do you think has to be changed? What do you take into account? Just give us an idea of where your mind is at when you see this.
My mind and the mind of the scientists working with me and supporting with evidence this outlook and the CAP and many policies, which is the role of the Joint Research Center in the European Commission. Well, let me tell, first of all, that modeling is a very powerful tool. And we have seen it, we have heard it, but it has to be put in a wider context. And this wider context shall help to understand the narrative that has to be associated with the results that we get from the models, but also it can help to address the limitations given by the modeling assumptions. This is the reason why at the Joint Research Center, the way we work is to have a suite of models that have to work all in parallel. This is very important for us. We have developed a platform which is called IMAP. IMAP stands for the Integrated Modeling Agriculture Policy Analysis, and this already includes interconnected models. They are complementary to each other, and they take into consideration various geographical scale, because we work from biophysical, regional, or global. They take into consideration various time dimensions, short, medium, or long-term dimensions, and they also look at different economic scenarios, coverage, like all farm level we heard, and also sectoral level. The Agli-King-Cosimo model is the one we have used for, the main one that we have used for the economic analysis for the outlook, which has just been released. But we have also added to this economic model more biophysical elements already. And this has helped us to extend analysis to look, for example, to pressures on the environment. We have used the Capri model, for example, to analyze scenarios such as nitrogen surplus or greenhouse gas emissions. So all these elements already working together, working in parallel to have a better understanding and provide better scenarios that can be used. And now to beat Ben's on his technicalities, blah, blah, I will also add econometric models that are used and social accounting matrices that are part of this toolbox. And later, I would like also to say why this toolbox, which is already very complex, very dynamic, difficult to keep up to date, and all these models that have to continue to remain up to date with the right data, etc., are part of a bigger toolkit. But I will come back to this on at a later stage. Just to say that we also apply, and this is very important, I haven't heard a lot until now about behavioral experiments that we do. We look, for example, how economic actors react to various policy or policy interventions. For example, labels that are addressed to consumers, we study what effects they can have for the economy, for example. Or the same thing, voluntary schemes for farmers, the effect that these schemes can have, if they can be effective or not. And finally, the Joint Research Center is also at the forefront. We have been really pioneer in foresight, which has become now very used in many policies, and we use it to anticipate scenarios, to anticipate what policy can be in future. And we also provide this evidence and we add it to our toolkit together with the use of artificial intelligence that can really speed up our analysis and provide a wider view and better scope and information integration.
Just on that final point, artificial intelligence, AI, what are you using it for? Is it data crunching, or is it actually for part of the forecast? Where are you using it? What sort of tools?
We use it for both things.
Right.
We certainly use for data crunches, which we use more and more for all data, for data coming also from different sources. Now we are integrated different sources, very much so data coming from Earth observation, for example, that are being used, and that will have to be used more and more. Part of that wider toolkit I want to refer later. But we also use it for foresight and for many different techniques and analysis that we carry out.
Seth, you're nodding, so I'm guessing it's the same for you. You're using a lot of AI now in this?
In combination with things like Earth observation for short-run market analysis, right? And let me put in a plug here as well, too, that we have less data to work from. So as these folks do modeling, to just remind folks that we're actually losing international data. Countries who are not supporting the data we need in order to do this work.
Marion, actually, the look on your face then was quite interesting. Do you just want to quickly pick up on that actually, you know, if the data sets are reducing, does it make the work more challenging?
Yeah, of course, the work is becoming more challenging if the data sets are reduced, and in particular because it's important data that we are missing of some very important producers. I'm thinking here notably of China and Russia. But if you allow me, I would like to come back to some of the previous discussion where I find there has been a lot of emphasis on what we got wrong.
Yeah, let's get some good what you got right.
I would like to give a positive story here. We worked with this model a few years ago and had an effect on something that I have considered have been very important for the work we did. In this house, I think we remember very well the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And this had an important impact on agricultural markets because suddenly two major commodity exporters, in particular grain exporters, were at war. And the press was full with 40 to 50% of exports are going to disappear from markets. And prices went up drastically. And we considered that it was important to give a bit of nuance to that story because well, it's 50% of exports maybe, but it's not 50% of world production. So when it comes to global food security, the storyline should be a different one. And second, one of the two actors, there was no reason why exports would be reduced from Russia if it's not because they take measures to reduce exports. So we use this fantastic model to run a scenario. What happens if Ukraine cannot export anymore, depending on how much production is affected, and what if Russia chooses not to export anymore? And here's something very important I would like to say. The way we communicate on what we do is very important. And here the nuance was cannot export anymore or chooses not to export anymore. So it's the narrative we changed with the work we did, and we brought out completely different numbers than the ones that we're currently seeing in markets. We expected that prices would maybe in the medium run be 10 to 13% higher, but not 50%, and we were right with those numbers. And by bringing out these numbers, you can actually influence markets, because you show that maybe the narrative that is going around in the press is too much of a panic, is exaggerated, and it's not the real one. So yes, this model is useful, in particular the scenario analysis, as Seth mentioned, and therefore it's very important what kind of scenarios we look at when we do that, and I would like to come back to how we communicate about them. On communication, maybe I'll come back to this later. We already heard about exchange rates and people getting exchange rates wrong. The exchange rates are something very important for the narratives around food, but I'll come back to that if there's an opportunity.
Okay, no problem, because what we'll do is I know Catherine wants to come in now, but we'll come back to how we communicate later, definitely. Catherine.
Yeah, but though we'll come back,
yes.
I think it's an important part. So to continue on the positive note, just wanted, my first key message has been brought in already by Marion, so that's very good. The second one is that it's of course about the data we are collecting, it's about the analysis that we are doing, and of course we may miss some data sometimes if some exporting countries or major producers like the one that you've mentioned are not necessarily sharing them with us. But the good thing is also that, and that comes back to communicating, it's that I think we have improved at global level the way we are engaging with each other and sharing information and data and have a proper conversation on what's happening. I'm thinking here about AMIS, which is an important platform that was created some time ago, and where I think it's important not just to say we have data, but that we use this data to engage and talk to each other, so that we also sometimes get a better understanding of what's happening on markets, how we can also prevent, restrictions on trade or policy action that would be detrimental to trade and more generally to food security. So yes, indeed, we have some gaps indeed, but we have improved. And I think that a good example of that, I would dare to say, is that we were better in handling what has happened, when the war in Ukraine started. We were better equipped to avoid unnecessary trade restriction that we were in 2017, when we had, these hunger riots.
Yeah.
And that needs to be said because, we don't only have bad news.
Sure, and that talks to resilience with your first point. Okay, let's focus then on how this is communicated, because a report is only good if it serves the purpose it's for. If it stays in an office, if it stays on a QR code, it doesn't do anything for anyone. Talk to us about AMIS then, and communication, and what is a good example there.
So let me first, am I on? Yes. So let's touch base about AMIS. AMIS, I feel very passionate about this question of market transparency, right? Because that was at the heart of AMIS, which was set up by the G20 following the price hikes in 2007, 2008, then later in 2010. I happened to be working at the Commission. At that time, we spent a lot of time thinking about the high prices and the impacts of the high prices. But eventually, the G20 initiative was set up to enhance the market transparency. And if you think about it, it's a very simple mechanism. We have 28 participants. We like to talk about participants, not members, because it's not, we provide, by sharing the information, we provide global public good, which is not only for members, so it's not a members-only organizations. And the key to this transparency, and of course, Seth, as a person who was guiding the AMIS for 2 years in his position as AMIS chair, knows all about it. So the importance is to share timely information, right? So we issue information on the monthly basis. These are the projections for the balance sheet elements for the 4 basic commodities. We do take a lot of criticism for that we are only focusing on wheat, maize, rice, and soybeans, but the simplicity of it, it also carries some benefits because you are really focusing on these basic crops. And then we now expanded also to the vegetable oils and fertilizer markets. But where I wanted to go with this, and it also goes when what Marian was mentioned, that the things can change very fast. When we issued, and again said, why don't we talk about how you led the USDA Outlook conference the day the invasion started, right? You had the Outlook, and the Outlook was only old immediately you presented it. I mean, you didn't even have to present it, probably. So things on the markets, when we are talking about the transparency in the short term, can happen really fast. We really, I mean, there was some indication that something might be happening in the Ukraine, but we didn't know the scale, we didn't know the implications, we didn't really realize just later on how the food price index, the FAO food price index is going to hit all-time records. Then eventually, as more information became available, also thanks to the work of OECD, the situation calmed down. So the transparency on the market, the actual transparency on the physical markets, is very much a matter of short term, right? But when the medium-term modeling comes in, it kind of gives you a framework, right? The baseline, that this is what might be happening. And it sends a signal because if you are a farmer and you are deciding that you are going to invest into a new tractor, you need to know a little bit more than what is happening in the right season, right? One of those tractors that the commissioner mentioned yesterday that looked like laboratories. So that takes a lot of effort. So the framework is provided by the medium-term outlook for the investment decisions, for the policy decision, for risk management. So that's where I see the medium-term outlook coming in.
Catherine, you look like you can't come in on that.
Yeah. So I think it's very important, and I concur with what Monica said. And when we are designing policy, we don't just want to follow the trend. In fact, we want to contribute to shape the future, basically. So that's very important to make clear that with this kind of analysis and work, we want to trigger an evidence-based conversation with the key stakeholders of the food chain, with all those who have a say, with policymakers, so that we make sure also that we're not just going to look at what could happen, but then take action so that, good things will happen and bad things will not happen. So that's very important. Maybe at this point in time, I can also, and I can give examples of platforms or forums where at EU level we are doing that. For example, this Agri-food Chain Observatory, where we have a conversation, with the stakeholders on the basis of this kind of evidence. Let me say also that communication is always challenging, but this is very important. And here this is also about making sure that we also have tools, indicators also that helps to better measure what is at stake. So this is also about getting the right data, the relevant data. And here we need also to, we talk a lot about resilience and sustainability. We're not always good at measuring that. And I think this was something that Seth mentioned. And I'd just like to illustrate saying that we need to do, I think we need to do a better job in the way we are measuring sustainability and resilience, not just at EU level. I would say this is a global endeavor for me. And
what would that look like?
For example, just to illustrate and be concrete and not too technical, blah blah, you know. We had a couple of weeks ago an international conference that was organized with the US Department of Agriculture and at OECD on, and some of the participants today were involved, where we talked about how can we together better measure sustainable growth, productivity growth. Meaning what? That we have the so-called total factor productivity, which is an important indicator to measure the productivity of our agriculture using the input and the output. This is very good. This is very useful, and we can benchmark, compare, see where we are, and we see that we are stagnating. But it doesn't give you, it doesn't depict, fully what is important to us now that we are saying we need to do to improve our sustainability and resilience. So basically, how can we work and enrich this indicator, maybe with other indicators, maybe combining that, integrating that together, so that we have a better understanding of, the performance of our agriculture in economic terms. This is essential. Competitiveness, profitability is essential, but also in terms of its environmental and maybe later also social dimension. And this is the work that we are doing together. So hopefully, in a couple of years, I say not in 10 years, we need that now. In a couple of years, we'll be able to have that. And that is important to be able also then to convey the message to farmers based on evidence that they are making progress, they are advancing in terms of sustainability and resilience.
Yeah, because it's got to be fed back. You need that entire loop so that people can see what is happening and what is progressing into the future. Johan, let me bring you in here because you obviously were there at the meeting. You were listening intently. What's going through your mind when we talk about measuring sustainability and trying to counter volatility, but also be ready for the unknowns that are coming down the line?
Thanks very much. Let me first make a very brief comment on communication. I think it's extremely important. I mean, my own institute invests a ton of time and energy and funding actually in communication in terms of blogs and seminars on all the reports that we do. And we got a lot of very positive reactions to it from all over the world on that. On the AMIS issue, AMIS is very important, okay? It was introduced after the 2007-2008 food price crisis, and it's played a very important role. The effect has been, but there's also some mixed effects. I mean, if you look at after COVID-19, there was a lot of countries which introduced export restrictions again. Following all the information we got from AMIS, we could say, listen, the stocks are actually quite high. The impact is going to be much less than 2007, 2008. The result has been many countries reduced the export restriction. The impact on the Ukraine crisis and the following of it is mixed. Okay, we had the same things. We had information on stocks. Relatively, China didn't release the information and things like that. But I mean, there's been a reduction or a removal again of some of the initial export restraints. But there's still a lot around. Okay, so it's not just that. On the particular question on sustainability and resilience and how to deal with it, I think there's a difference between sustainability issues. I mean, there's a lot of work going on, very good work in terms of bringing in indicators related to biodiversity, greenhouse gas effects, different ways of measuring sustainability. And I think I'm actually quite optimistic that that will work out. There's a lot of technicalities, but there's been a lot of really good academic and work in academic institutions, policy institutions, such as the OECD and FAO and other organizations on that. I'm much less optimistic on the resilience issue, because I think resilience is related to shocks, okay, and volatility, and I think that's much harder to deal with in models, because just by technically it's harder to deal with. It also means it's things you do not anticipate. And so models can play a role. So what's a good resilience strategy? It has different components. One is anticipate shocks, okay, and that role models can play a very important information role. Then it's prepare for shocks, okay, and they are risk model, de-risking investments and things like that. Insurance schemes are really important. Financing issues are important. And then, of course, once the shock hits you, how to deal with it. And there, of course, financing issues, social safety measures are all very important. And I think their modeling exercise can help indirectly to basically help basically prepare or people, all kinds of stakeholders involved, that they have to invest in these things, and for policymakers to basically inform them these things are really important, you have to do it. But actually measuring it is quite difficult, actually. Thank you.
I'm very conscious of time, so what I'm going to do is ask all of the participants to just give, and literally in no more than 30 seconds each, just a thought that as everyone goes into the break now and starts to look at this report, just something to keep in the back of your mind as you look at it. It could be a limitation of the report, it could be a great thing about the report, you know, whatever it is, but just as you're reading it, so literally just a couple of words. So Alexandra, I'll start with you. Just keep in your minds as you look at the report.
Being the scientific body inside the Commission, my message can only be linked to the fact that it is really evidence-based, that you have used the best models, and we are collaborating very strictly with policy. This is the dialogue science policy. Let me add that the model that we've been talking about is one of the elements that have been helping here, together with data, better data, integration of the data, simplification, which is the work ahead. So when you read it, think also ahead, together with the technologies that we will have to look at, also mentioned, but work had to be done, and the use of artificial intelligence. All this is there, you have to find it, but it's there.
We'll give people time to look through it. Monica, just a thought to keep in the back of their minds?
Just very, very quickly, I like the idea of having a separate chapters on fruits and vegetables, right? It goes into the healthy diets I mentioned earlier, so read the chapter on the fruits and vegetables.
I'm sure there'll be lots of people in the room who goes, yes, but read the chapter on dairy first, or read the chapter on meat. Well, yeah, but that's your recommendation. Johan.
Yeah, just repeating what I started with saying, I thought both the report, I mean, as far as I've seen it, because it was just embargoed until now, but I thought it was very good, also recognizing the limitations is great. And I thought what you talked about, Benj, you thought about the future in terms of collaborating with other organizations, not try to do everything yourself. I think it's a great idea, and I think you've made tremendous progress, and I think you will make more. I think it's great. Thanks.
Seth, what page will you be turning to first?
Well, I'd start with just, again, complementary on, I'll go back to my three-legged stool. So complementary on the tool, increasingly able to think about policy formation to address all three of these. Again, I think that we've had the luxury in certain periods in time of trying to address maybe only one or two, but you've got to accomplish all three. So complementary, complements on the ability and advances in the model to do that, to handle all of these aspects, because we got to get all three.
Yeah, absolutely. Monica.
Yeah, I'm think that indeed, if you're an expert on a certain area, go to that chapter, go to that section, read the detail. But in general, I would advise you to look at one or two things that you find striking the messages that you find new or different, and try to remember them, because we have limited brain space, and there's a lot of detail in that in that report. Try to remember them and use them, because in this way you also make publicity for the report.
Yeah, and I would add, tweet them and put the hashtag EU Agri-food Days on it as well. We'll see if we can get it trending again today. Catherine.
Thank you, Sasha. Read it all, not just a section on fruit and vegetable, but more importantly, be part of the conversation we're going to have on the basis of this report when we are going to discuss, in the different platform I mentioned, but also to prepare the next CAP and to prepare the vision on agriculture and food, because this is going to be an important element, evidence that we're going to use in the context of this work.
Fabulous.
So join us.
And read it all. Read it all. Right, should we have a look at the QR code again? Is it possible to put that back up on screen? And if you're watching us online, we'll get you the QR code as well. Is that possible that we could see it again? Yes, lovely. Thank you very much. So if you didn't grab it before, there's the QR code. You can read at your leisure. Read it all, says Catherine. Just to let you know that during the coffee break at the DG Agri stand, there are experts responsible for the sectors on fruit and vegetables, biofuels and sugar, and macroeconomics, all available at this particular break. I'll let you know who will be there at lunchtime as well, because it is going to change, and also this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's been incredibly interesting. Please thank all our panelists here on stage. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break now. If you're watching us online, we'll be back here in the room in half an hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, quick cup of tea, cup of coffee, and we'll see you back here in half an hour. Thank you.